If you've ever found yourself laying awake at 2 in the morning, replaying a conversation you had 3 years ago, you already know that overthinking isn't exactly a choice. It's more like a loop you've been invited into, but never given the exit codes for. You find yourself analyzing the tone of a 3 word text message or wondering if that glance from a colleague meant they've finally realized you don't belong there. It doesn't look like a big deal to the outside world. It just looks like someone being thorough or careful. But on the inside, it feels like your mind is a courtroom where you are simultaneously the defendant, the prosecutor, and the judge, and the trial never ends. Most people call this anxiety. Some call it being a perfectionist. But if we look closer, we start to see that overthinking isn't a defect in your intelligence. It's a very specific, very sophisticated way of trying to stay safe. When you overthink, you aren't just thinking too much. You are attempting to build a map of every possible future so that no matter what happens, you can't be caught off guard. If you can predict every way a conversation could go wrong, you feel just for a second like you've protected yourself from the sting of rejection. If you can analyze your past mistakes until they're nothing but dust, you feel like you've paid the debt for making them. We often think of overthinking as a search for a solution, but it's actually a search for certainty in a world that doesn't offer any. It's a survival mechanism that's forgotten the war is over. Notice how often your overthinking revolves around other people's perceptions. You aren't usually overthinking the laws of physics or the way plants grow. You're overthinking the space between you and someone else. That's because, for many of us, our early identity was built on being correct or agreeable to maintain emotional safety. If you grew up in an environment where you had to anticipate someone else's mood to stay okay, your brain became a high performance radar system. Overthinking is just that radar still spinning, looking for a storm that passed years ago. It's not a weakness. It's a form of protection that has become a prison. And here is where it gets interesting. We often assume that if we just think a little longer, we'll eventually hit the right answer and the noise will stop. We think we're just one aha moment away from clarity. But the real reason you overthink isn't because you haven't found the answer yet. It's because you are using your mind to avoid a feeling. Beneath the layer of, what if they're mad at me or what if I fail, is a raw, quiet emotion, usually powerlessness or shame. Thinking feels like doing something, it feels active, it feels like control. If you're thinking, you aren't just sitting with the discomfort of not knowing. As long as you're analyzing the problem, you don't have to feel the weight of it. The overthinking isn't the struggle. The overthinking is the shield. This creates a very specific kind of identity, the identity of the observer. When you are stuck in a loop of analysis, you aren't actually participating in your life. You are watching it happen from a distance. You become a narrator who is too busy describing the scene to actually live in it. You start to believe that your thoughts are more real than your actions. You might spend 3 hours thinking about a 10-minute task, and by the time you're done, you're more exhausted than if you had just done the work. That's because the mental simulation of a task is often more taxing than the task itself. But there's an even deeper layer to this. For some, overthinking is a way of keeping themselves small. Because as long as you are still deciding or still processing, you don't have to commit. You don't have to face the consequences of a real world choice. It's a sophisticated form of procrastination that disguises itself as intellectual rigor. If you never stop thinking, you never have to start living. And if you never start, you can't be judged for the outcome. It's an invisible cycle of safety through stagnation. We tend to think that the opposite of overthinking is confidence. But confidence is just another word for trust, and trust is the one thing an overthinker finds impossible. Not just trust in others, but trust in yourself to handle the fallout of a mistake. If you believe that a single wrong move will destroy your identity or your relationships, then of course you're going to check the map 1,000 times. The overthinking mind doesn't believe in good enough. It believes in perfect or catastrophic. When you see it this way, you realize that your mind isn't broken. It's actually working incredibly hard for you. It's trying to spare you from pain. It's trying to ensure you're never embarrassed, never rejected, and never wrong. It's just that the cost of that insurance policy is your entire life. It costs you the ability to be present, the ability to be spontaneous, and the ability to feel the very things you're trying so hard to manage. Once you see the pattern, it becomes harder to take the thoughts so seriously. You start to recognize the spin for what it is. Not a signal of a real problem, but a signal of a perceived threat. You realize that you aren't actually looking for a solution. You're looking for an escape from a feeling that you're perfectly capable of feeling. Understanding this doesn't make the thoughts go away instantly. It just changes your relationship to them. You stop being the person in the courtroom and you start being the person watching the trial from the back of the room. You see that the prosecutor is tired, the judge is biased, and the defendant has already served their time. It was never a lack of intelligence that kept you in the loop. It was a need for safety that you didn't know you could provide for yourself in other ways. The pattern was never random. It was a strategy. And once you see the strategy, the game starts to change. Understanding yourself isn't about fixing a broken machine. It's about finally learning how the machine was designed to work and realizing that you're the one with your hand on the switch. Awareness alone changes how you move, and that's the beginning of everything.